Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Beauty and the Beast from 1946, or La Belle et la Bête. Beauty and the Beast is probably one of the most well-regarded live-action fairy tale adaptations ever made. And if you've ever wanted to get into foreign film or film in general, it's probably one of those films people definitely recommend to you at some point. It's a major movie, and there's a reason for that. It's visually poetic, it's surreal, it's strange while also being very accessible. It's different, it's kind of its own unique thing. Jean Cocteau made probably one of the most different and stranger fairy tale adaptations. Disney could only dream of making a live action adaptation of a fairy tale last as long and be as well regarded and as influential as this film has, playing on its own kind of different wavelength that I don't think anyone's been able to get back. Beauty and the Beast has long been one of the more classic films of French cinema and adds a kind of strangeness to the tale that makes it feel all that more real and all that more fantastical at the same time. It's a film I've often looked back at through my time really getting into cinema, and a beautiful film that's many people's favorite, including the recently deceased Robert Osborne, and is almost always on 100 greatest films of all time list or something like that because of what it achieves. It takes you to a totally different place, and it's probably the first major Beauty and the Beast adaptation, at least before the Disney animated film in the 90s, that really stuck out for people, and in a post-World War II world was the major hit that people needed in a major fantasy kind of film that people needed at a time when they were just coming out of the horrors of war. But you don't really absolutely need to know its historical context to love this film. It is a surreal, beautiful, fantastical tale that lives up to the fantastical fairy tale nature that you used to dream as a child and not really understand. It makes it part feel like a dream and also feel like something isn't quite 1946 and you wonder what year it even came from, as it comes from its own thing as Jean Cocteau's first feature-length film that surprised everyone and keeps surprising people years and years later. This version of Beauty and the Beast has kind of a different plot, and I think the interesting thing about looking up Beauty and the Beast, it's believed to be a story that was told from storytellers and such back in the days, and then it eventually in 1757 was written down by Jeanne-Marie de Beaumont. Wow, that's like a long fucking name. The version that was written down originally is actually very different from both this and the Disney film. And to me, it's a fairy tale that has always changed from generation and tale and film and book adaptations and whatever. So it doesn't seem to be a story that's as tied down as I think we interpret it today. But Beauty and the Beast is about, of course, schematics, you know, the fact that there's a beauty and the beast and there's a dad and stuff. That doesn't seem to change too much. But La Belle et la Bête is about Belle, who has two sisters and a brother, and her family is not financially in the greatest shape because they're a shipping family whose ships have been lost at sea, and he's kind of in financial ruin. But then he finds out one of his ships has come back, so he goes to find the money, but then her dad goes off and the ship has already been taken by the money lenders to clear all their debts. It was all taken, so he comes back and he gets lost in the woods and finds this castle that's surreal and strange and has all these fantastical elements going on within it. And then he finds a rose to bring back to his beautiful daughter Belle, but when he takes the rose, the beast sentences him to death unless he can bring one of his daughters to take his place. So he goes back and takes his horse Magnificent, who's like a nice beautiful horse, to go back to get Belle, and Belle comes back and then is stuck in the castle to make sure her father doesn't die, and she slowly kind of grows affection for the beast as it goes, as most Beauty and the Beast stories do. I think the interesting thing about Beauty and the Beast is how it's changed over the years. I was introduced to this film by my parents when I started getting into movies, in foreign film specifically, and it was kind of pitched to me, I guess, by my parents, and probably quite normally for most people at this time, as a juxtaposition towards the animated Disney film. Obviously, this film represents one thing to people in post-war, but I think it represents something to people after the Disney film because they're nonetheless comparing it to that film, especially because it's so different and surreal and strange, and you can go like, holy shit, I didn't know Beauty and the Beast could be like that. Most fairy tales are looked at in more of a kind of normal childhood setting as being safe in the way they are told and the way they are presented, and this isn't necessarily that way, although I wouldn't say it's like controversial or anything like that. It doesn't feel that way, but it is, which is kind of interesting about it. And watching it in juxtaposition to that is actually interesting. A lot of people say this had an influence on that film. This time I don't see it, I'm sure they watched it. I mean, it was so highly regarded for so long. I'm sure the people who worked on that did see it, like most people who are film students. Not everyone. I don't know if it holds the same regard as it used to, but it's definitely like kind of in that oeuvre of films that film students always see, specifically like French movies and stuff. I think one of the things it really does with this Beauty and the Beast is it often makes the Beast castle feel like a dream. Like when she's walking through that opening, when Belle's walking through the castle at the beginning and you see these hands holding the candlesticks, it feels weird and almost like kind of part a stage play, part a cheaper film, part a weird dream. You're not sure what the limits are, and it's often draped in shadow and darkness. It's often shown in a way that doesn't feel like something that is reality, but then their relationship does. It feels more presented in a way, and it feels so different from where you see Belle with her family that it often does feel like you've entered a new magical realm, which apparently they had problems with film stocks and getting cameras, as Europe wasn't like, you know, in the greatest shape post World War II, and that I think actually helps. I don't know if they use different film stocks, like, okay, let's use this film stock on this and that. It doesn't say that specifically in any information I could find, but I get the impression that happened. I don't, but they lead you to believe that, so let's go with it. I would believe that just because when watching it this time, I was like, I feel like I'm in a dream. I feel like I'm in a magical realm. And there was one point I think Beast mentioned how the way the sun moved in the castle wasn't the same as outside, which I've seen films try to do that and they have to explain it more. And it's funny that he just says that one line and I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense, because I feel like I'm in a magical realm. I feel like I'm in a weird, crazy place that I can't get out of. I feel like I'm in a strange castle. It feels like you're in another world, disconnected from everything else, which I've never seen a Beauty and the Beast film do that as well as this film does. It really makes you feel like you're in a completely strange alien world almost. Specifically, I think the way they do the Beast in this with the great makeup, who's played by Jeanne-Marie, I believe, who does an amazing job as both the Beast and her brother's friend and Prince Charming and all that stuff. But he does such a good job as the Beast, you almost get used to him and you almost like him more. Even though he comes in it originally as strange and weird and off-putting, he becomes the most compelling. And so much so that when he turns, spoilers I guess for Beauty and the Beast, when he turns into the prince, there's the famous story that Greta Garbo actually said, bring me back my Beast. And even Marlene Dietrich squeezed Jean Cocteau's hand very hard when she saw that the Beast had changed. Like, most people actually do not like in this version that the Beast has changed, which actually, when I talked to a few people about the versions of Beauty and the Beast, they all said like they never liked the Prince Charming. That I didn't know that, but specifically it's been more pointed out and talked about with this version, and I think that is true in this version, because she even says like, I'm disappointed. I think this one brings you around more towards the Beast and makes you have more of an arc with that character, because you start out, he's so alienating and strange and weird. They don't really do the whole intro thing and go like, this is how he turned into a beast and stuff. He's just like a beast and you kind of accept him, and he seems angry and he seems strange and he seems weird, but by the time he turns, you're on his side as an audience, and I think that says a lot about Jean Cocteau was doing. This is his first feature-length film, and I think he did an amazing job trying to do poetic imagery and a lot of like simple camera techniques that, even though I could be like, oh, I know what that is, there was a magicalness about it, which I think shows why this film has lived on for so long. You could say, oh, this film's so outdated, it's so old, all those things, but I would strongly disagree with, well, I mean, I guess it is old and stuff, but I would disagree saying it's dated in a way. I think it holds up incredibly well based on those effects. This came out in 1946, which is the same year as It's a Wonderful Life in America and A Matter of Life and Death in England, and this is, I guess, France's entry into major fantasy films that would go into the all-time canon of greatest films ever made, coming out right after World War II. And clearly that is something that everyone needed to move on. Everyone needed an escapism. Although all three of those films are great films, and I'm not going to act like one maybe is better than the other. I think this is probably the best at escapism, because the other two kind of make you think about consequences and things, I guess, so that kind of brings you down a little. I heard one critic for the BBC bring that up, and I went, wow, that is fucking crazy, because I thought of this film in the post-war setting, but thinking of how fantasy was such an important part for film audiences, this one was a major hit. And I think people needed that kind of romantic, strange, surreal fantasy that kind of whisked you away and took you in a place that you never thought you would go, in an area you never thought you could be. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about Beauty and the Beast. This version is it's so romantic and it's surreal and it's strange. And Jean Cocteau didn't consider himself a surrealist and didn't like that movement at all. But I often, when I was introduced to this imagery, I thought that, and I still think that about this film, but I think it works within it. Oftentimes I think when people think of surrealism and trippy imagery, they don't think of it doing it for a specific reason. But I think Jean Cocteau did that for a specific reason, to take you to another magical realm that was this kingdom. The kingdom in this feels like you have woken up in a dream. It feels like a dream state in a way that I haven't seen another person do with a set in a way. What's interesting is we can talk about how much money they spent on a set, and this isn't to say like, look what they did with so little kind of narrative that every film critic uses, but I think in Beauty and the Beast, the difference is that they successfully did that. Like when I was watching this time, I was like, I'm so like compelled, and I feel like I actually felt differently about that set than the rest of it, which is an insane feeling to have that change how I felt about this film and the kind of film I was watching. Like the film had changed in such a way, and I don't think I've seen that from Beast Castle before. This was a major film for me growing up, and seeing how different countries and different adaptations and different stories can do different things. And I think what will always stick out for me with what Jean Cocteau did with this film, and did in such a way that he was considered probably one of the filmmakers who Truffaut named auteur theory with. He mentioned Jean Cocteau, but it showed me when I was learning about film how film could be different, and how different countries can take on things, and how you can adapt things in different ways. And it highlights kind of probably one of the things you need to understand about film and art. It's not what it's about, but how it is about it. And I think how Beauty and the Beast, or La Belle et la Bête, is about it makes it unique. And in the face of probably one of the greatest animated films of all time, this can stand on its own and be its own film. Obviously, the interpretation of this has changed. This isn't this amazing fantasy release people needed. I saw the New York Times review from Bosley Crowley was 1947, so I think it took a little longer to come out in America and was more of an art house hit, but it seemed to do fairly well everywhere. But I think it was that kind of release that people needed at the time. Now it plays as a surreal, stranger adaptation in juxtaposition to the Disney one that is very literal in what it's doing. This isn't as much. It's poetic, it's stranger, it doesn't have a lot of dialogue, so it's probably an easier foreign film to watch subtitle wise. It is actually a very good film to get you into foreign film and French film and older film in ways, and it can also put you in a stranger, odder place that a lot of live action and fairy tale adaptations can't do as much, but it takes you to that childhood sense of wonder that this is a wonderful, magical, different world. And maybe that's what people in World War II needed, but I think that's probably what you need if you're getting into movies, to experience that and experience the power of what a movie can do. And I think Beauty and the Beast has a lot of power, and it has a lot of power for a viewer to go through. And that's why it's held in such high regard and held as long as it has. I will always probably love Beauty and the Beast to a certain regard. I think it's probably one of the great fairy tale adaptations of all time, and one I won't soon forget. And one, when I think about different versions of the Beauty and the Beast, to me, there will always be two of them, and this will always probably be one of them that you should always consider, and one that is just a magical film experience that you won't soon forget, and almost feel like there's more magic and secrets beyond it, as I've probably been watching this movie for about 20 years. Not every day or something, but I've been watching it consistently over 20 years, and each time I feel like I've seen a different film and there's magic in it, but I'm also compelled with how relatable and interesting it is. It's quite a magical film, and I think Jean Cocteau made probably one of the great fairy tale adaptations of all time. So if you have seen Beauty and the Beast and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.